can somehow get back to Ithaca and Penelope and his son Telemachus, right? Think about this one. We have stories in the Iliad of fathers and sons, right? Nestor, for example, with his son Alcyoneus. That's and that's Anticulus, and Anticulus and Nestor. You'll even remember in that final sequence there where Antilochus is about to go on his chariot race. His father tells him how to cheat, right? I've given you the inside, scoop or whatever. In the Odyssey, we also have fathers and sons. Odysseus, of course, and Telemachus. Odysseus with his father Laertes. We also have Poseidon and Polyphemus, right? Poseidon is the father of the Cyclops Polyphemus. Think about this one in the Iliad. Odysseus will say to Achilles, and it's the last time we see Odysseus actually in the Iliad. Achilles is ready to go fight because Patroclus has been jacked, and Odysseus is the one that says, hey, before we go and fight, I think it's probably important that we eat and feed our soldiers, right? Some have said that the Odyssey is the epic of the most dining and eating. I mean, you're going to see this all the way through. Odysseus is about his tummy. He's about his belly. Achilles is about, let's jack somebody. Odysseus is about, wait, let's eat first, right? Think about this one. In the Iliad, Achilles doesn't have his girl Briseis because she's taken from him, his Time, right? And this notion of Time, Scooby Snack's honor, and Kleos glory are all going to be subsumed as well here, but in different kinds of ways. But think about it. Achilles doesn't have his girl Briseis. How does the poem end? In bed with Briseis. How does the Odyssey treat this? Same idea. Well, Penelope, of course, is estranged, gone from Odysseus, although she's in the story. Odysseus isn't with her for almost all the story until the very end, when you have this very interesting exchange between Penelope and Odysseus, and finally, guess what? They're in bed together. Interesting kind of correspondence. Of course, both Achilles and Odysseus, they demand respect. And if they don't get it, right, Achilles withdraws, and then, of course, we know what happens when he finally comes back into the battle, right? Odysseus will also demand respect. And, of course, at the very end, the fighting sequence of Achilles slaughtering, I mean, we think of Lycaon and the rest of them, throwing them into the river and all of that slaughtering that takes place in the Iliad, we're going to see it as well in the Odyssey at the end when Odysseus will jack, along with Telemachus' help, a couple of the guys, 108 suitors. He's going to kill every last one of them. We have a very similar kind of dynamic. If you don't respect these men, they will jack you up, right? Think about this one as another comparison. If character comparisons is one that we just saw. What about scene comparisons, scene types, right? Right? For example, this is the first adventure, in the first adventure story in the flashback, right? Odysseus will say, the very first thing we did after we left Troy is we went to this island kingdom called Ismaros. And there, we basically went in, we killed everybody, we took the women possession, and we raped and pillaged, and then we left. We sometimes call it the Little Troy. In other words, right after they left Troy, did the exact same thing. And in fact, Odysseus is called the Sack of Cities. I mean, you heard it in the opening lines of the Odyssey already, right? They destroy everything, right? Okay. In the last scene, we're back to, again, this slaughtering, just like the Iliad all over again, right? It's fascinating to think, I've already mentioned it, about type scenes, that remember, Book 22 we have of Iliad, we have Achilles versus Hector. Book 22 we have Odysseus versus the suitors, right? We've already mentioned it. Achilles in Book 9 in the Iliad, right? He's strumming his lyre when Odysseus and Phaenox and Ajax show up. He shows them Xenia. He takes care of them. Patroclus feeds them food and the like, right? We have the idea again of Xenia either being kept or broken. Likewise, when Odysseus shows up with Alcyoneus in the island of the Phaeacians, we have the same gig being played all over again. Think about this one. In the Odyssey, Book 8, line 518, we've got Nausicaa, who will do a very interesting thing. She'll kind of save Odysseus, and then on her way into the city, she'll give him some advice and a famous speech. And she'll suggest through a Greek word, zoigra, that you owe me. The word zoigra, that is actually the Greek word, is the same word that gets used in the Iliad, Book 10, line 442, when Odysseus is deciding whether to chop off Dolin's head or not in that famous night raid scene that he has with Diomedes. They have very interesting comparisons there. We want to see as well, though, how the Iliad and the Odyssey are quite different. For example, in Book 24, Achilles and Priam I have said to you that I think this is the most compelling single scene of the Iliad. There they are. Achilles, the old man, the young man, and Priam, the old man, are sitting there. Achilles has killed his sons. Priam is destroyed. And yet for a moment, a brief moment, there is mutual perspicacity. We talked about this in our lecture of Iliad 24. And they can actually see each other for a moment. There's something profound in that moment about the trajectory of Achilles, the development of his character. If you ask me what my favorite scene of the Odyssey is in terms of implication of telling us who Odysseus is in the Odyssey, in the same way that that moment says so much about how Achilles has finally got it, has recovered his humanity, he gets it. I like to go to book 22 of the Odyssey. Odysseus, covered in blood and guts, he's slaughtered all these men, and he screams out, "Is it over? We got everybody." And they bring two guys in front of him. They both fall on their knees. Odysseus, covered in blood and guts. This is at line 325 of book 22. He asks the first one, "Who are you?" And he goes, "Me, I'm Leodes. I'm a priest." Whew. Odysseus chops off his head right away. Well, he asks the next guy, "Who are you? What are you?" And at line 346, Phemius says, I'm a singer, I'm a bard, I'm a poet." And Odysseus says, "I'll let you live as long as you tell my story." Of course, the rumor had always been that Odysseus had just saved the life of Homer, and this is the poet who will tell the story. But notice the interesting tension. Odysseus will jack the priest, symbolic, of course, of reverence for the gods, but he'll let the one who sings about fame, Kleos, live. Right? Well, what do we learn about Odysseus in this moment? That fame is maybe more important to him than reverence to the gods. On the other hand, you get the sense that Achilles, it is about reverence to the gods. The minute that he is offended and hurt by the removal of his teammate, Briseis, he calls on who? Thetis, his mother, to do what? To go to the gods. In other words, he doesn't solve the problem himself. Instead, he calls on the gods. Notice a tension here. Odysseus, then, we could probably say it this way. Odysseus is a far more Promethean kind of character, right? You'll remember Prometheus, the one who fights against Zeus, doesn't cooperate. We can also point out how a key story serves as a backdrop. In other words, what you know allows you to read the things that are brand new to you. For example, over and over again, in fact, by line 41 of book 1, we are going to hear over and over again about the story of the homecoming of Agamemnon. Now, Agamemnon's homecoming is far different from Odysseus's, and yet there will be a lot of carryover there. For example, think of it. When Agamemnon shows up, because of course he sacrificed Iphigenia, his daughter, Clytemnestra's daughter, on his way to Troy. When he shows up, Clytemnestra, in his absence, of Agamemnon's absence, Clytemnestra has taken a lover, Aegisthus, and she has a plan. Revenge is on her mind. She is going to kill her own husband, right? And she does. Notice we have Penelope, who doesn't take a lover, even though she's got ample opportunities because those guys are sitting in her house the whole time. And when Odysseus comes home, the only thing she does is test him to make sure that it's actually him. There is no intention whatsoever of wanting to get any kind of revenge. Likewise, after Clytemnestra takes care of business on Agamemnon, Clytemnestra and Aegisthus together, then we have the son of Agamemnon, Orestes, who will in fact come back, and with the help of his sister Electra, but not much help, Orestes will get his revenge by taking care of the nasty lover, Aegisthus, and then finally killing his own mother. In other words, we're going to hear this story presented to Telemachus as a motif model story. You need to be taking care of the business back home with all those suitors in your father's house, eating all of your stuff, etc. We want to follow this strand of the story while we read the Odyssey, but we want to as well kind of pay attention to the ways in which stories inform stories in the Odyssey. Now, I just want to point out that one of the reasons why I have you guys reading our Robert Fagel's translation of both Iliad and Odyssey is these amazing essays that are presented by Bernard Knox in the opening 50 pages of the volume. Here's the problem with forewords, okay? They're at the beginning of the book, so most students think they need to read them first before they read the poem or the text or whatever. The only problem is that the forewords that are written by Bernard Knox assume that you know the poem pretty well. Let me give you a challenge. Go back to your Iliad volume. Take an hour and read that essay that Bernard Knox writes at the beginning of the volume of the Iliad, and you'll be blown away. Because now you know the Iliad, it's assumed so much. Same gig played out here with the Odyssey. However, there are a few key ideas that Knox will share. I just want to highlight a few of those. He points out that the 12,109 lines attributed to roughly 2,700 years ago or so, roughly 700 BCE is the composition date that's assigned. You have, he argues, many Odysseys, not just one. You have the Odyssey of Telemachus, this Bildungsroman, as the term is called. Again, I said we'll see this when we do Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. We'll see it in a number of texts that we study. The, of course, Odyssey, if you can use that term, of Penelope, her true fidelity. Notice, as opposed to Helen or Clytemnestra, who are they don't actually play the same game. However, put it in your notes. It will be fascinating to see the one moment in this text when we see Helen with Menelaus and Telemachus. That moment will be pivotal, and there's a whole lot that goes on there that scholars debate about even to this day. The personality of Helen versus the temperament of Penelope, right? And the ways in which they're quite similar, actually, as well. Well, think of Andromache and Astyanax, Penelope and Telemachus, mother and son relationships. There's a lot to be said of the fact that Telemachus will be raised through his formative years by only his mother. That is to say, a very modern kind of situation, a single mother situation. Or, think of it this way, the suitors, most of them have lost their fathers to the war at Troy. Odysseus took them all with him when he left 20 years ago. What is it like to have a bunch of young men grow up without fathers to keep them in line? Well, the Odyssey suggests, well, they kind of turn out the way the suitors turn out, and they're not really good guys at all, and in the end they all get kind of jacked for that. We've also got this notion of Odysseus and his Odyssey, right? Versus, for example, Achilles. Achilles is fated to die. Odysseus, no death narrative at all. We will make quite a bit of this from Dante on. What happens to Odysseus at the end? There's a reference to his death. We'll get to it in a moment. Of course, we have Odysseus as the singer. In Book 11 of the Odyssey, line 416, we're even told, Alcyoneus will say, the king of the Phaeacians will say, you have told your story with a singer's skill. Odysseus as artist, Odysseus as poet, right? Think about Achilles. He was singing those songs in Book 9, right, of Iliad, those songs of fallen heroes. And so we have some interesting kind of thing going on there, right? The revenge on the 108 suitors will be, of course, culminating with Odysseus's Odyssey. And yet, think of it, Odysseus is both singer and slaughterer. In other words, there's two sides to his temperament. He's artist, but he has the Achillean element to him as well. Here's another thing I want you to pay attention to, because we haven't mentioned it at all. The gods, and the relationship of the gods, and the notion of justice, and the idea of blame. By the way, this is clearly present on the mind of the poet. We get it right away in the very opening lines of Odyssey 1. We get this notion of Zeus speaking about who is to blame for all the pain of the world. It's Milton's Theodicy question, way before Milton ever played the game. You can find those lectures, of course, in my Harvard Classics lectures folder on Learn Strong, and you can go and see what we talk about with the Odyssey. In Odyssey 13, lines 171 to 173, we're told that the Phaeacians, who have helped Odysseus go back home, are jacked by Zeus and Poseidon for showing Xenia. That is to say, hospitality to Odysseus, doing the very thing that Zeus has said you have to do. And yet, in the poem, right, we got this strange question of justice. How about this one? At the very end of the Odyssey, we have a suitor, Amphiminus, who is he's a half-decent guy. Odysseus, in fact, is wanting to save this suitor, and yet we're told in Book 18, line 178, No way. Athena has decided he will be the number 3rd of the suitors to get jacked. Interesting. The role of women in the Odyssey I've already mentioned. The role of single mothers with Penelope raising Telemachus I've already mentioned. The power of the fact that the suitors are raised ostensibly without their fathers. This is all important. And then finally, Penelope's testing of Odysseus at the end of the Odyssey, with her needing to find out if it's actually her man by referencing their bed, is going to carry all kinds of interesting ironies that we'll want to take a look at, right? There are key themes that will come through key scenes in the text. One of the most important is the question of identity and recognition. So write this down. This is some of our last comments here about the Odyssey An Introduction. The Odyssey as identity and recognition, right? It's a key question throughout the Odyssey. You're going to see it right away. Who are you, Odysseus? Who are you, right? By the way, in the rule of Xenia, when a guy shows up, a visitor shows up to your house, you feed them. After you've fed them and taken care of them, then and only then can you ask them, who are you and where are you from? You can kind of think about maybe why that would make sense, because if you're allowed to ask right away who are you and where you're from, you might in fact reject the hospitality to a stranger if the stranger has the wrong name or whatever, okay? There is, however, I think this issue of recognition that's permeating all the way through the Odyssey, but there's 2 moments at the end of the Odyssey I just want to set you up for. One of those, the most famous, is of course the Argus story of book 17, line 319. Odysseus in disguise comes back to his castle. On his way in, there's the old dog Argus lying, we're told, on a pile of dung. Old dog, poorly treated, for 20 years been waiting for his master's return, and the moment he sees Odysseus, he knows who it is. Odysseus can't be given away. He gives the dog a stern look, and the dog, heartbroken, lays his head over and dies, making Achilles even more enraged that what these suitors have done is destroyed everything he loves. It's a powerful moment because the dog recognizes Odysseus and none of the suitors can. Ironically, later he'll call the suitors dogs. And then, of course, they had that moment with Odysseus and Telemachus. We have the moment with Odysseus and his own father, Laertes, at the very end of the Odyssey. And all of these different recognitions are significant. Thinking about fathers is important because Achilles is the only son of Peleus. We know about that from the opening lines even of the Iliad. And Laertes has only one son, Odysseus. So again, you got these interesting typesets, the Achillean versus the Odyssean. Finally, we have no death narrative for Odysseus at all in this poem, in the same way that we have no death narrative for Achilles in the Iliad. We do have a reference, though. In Odyssey 11, Tiresias will say at lines 153 to 156 that after you get back to Ithaca and you take care of the suitors and you're reunited with your wife and your son, the last thing you got to do is to make sure that you figure things out with Poseidon. You're going to take an oar and you're going to walk inland. And you're going to keep walking until somebody walks up to you and says, why do you have that threshing fork? In other words, they don't know what an oar is. So you're going to have to go a long ways inland and there make a final altar to Poseidon. And then, Tiresias says, you're going to live out your life quiet and peacefully. The Odyssey, in many ways then, is kind of our way to learn about adventure and struggle. In the same way that maybe somebody far inland doesn't know what an oar is, the assumption is maybe we don't really understand what journeys are all about and adventures are all about until we play the game of reading the Odyssey. Think of it this way. If you go into a fiction writing class, they will often say to you, there are fundamentally 2 kinds of stories that you can write. Stranger comes to town and hero takes a journey. Think about the ways in which the Odyssey assumes both of these ideas and does it beautifully, right? In ways that make us forever grateful of what it is that we have in our possession. Well, the influences of the Odyssey cannot be overstated. The ways in which these kinds of ideas permeate our culture. In your junior year, we studied Walt Whitman, and I gave a lecture on Song of Myself, passage 46 and 47. But let me just remind you of some of the lines from passage 46, 47 of Song of Myself, Whitman's classic text, and hear the overtones of Odyssey. Whitman, in his optimistic American voice, says, I know I have the best of time and space, and was never measured and never will be measured. I walk, a perpetual journey. He could have used the word Odyssey. Come, listen all. My signs are a rainproof coat, good shoes, a staff cut from the woods. No friend of mine takes his ease in my chair. I have no chair, no church, no philosophy. Sounding very Odyssean, right? As he jacks that priest. I lead no man to a dinner table, library exchange. But each man and each woman of you I lead upon a knoll, a little hill. My left hand hooking you around the waist, my right hand pointing to landscapes of continents in the public road. In other words, he says, I love to show the student what is out there, what is available. Think about the way Homer does this in the Odyssey. Not I, Whitman continues. Not I. Not anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it for yourself. It's not far. It's within reach. Perhaps you've been on it since you were born and did not know. Perhaps it is everywhere, on water and on land. Long enough to end. Long enough have you dreamed contemptible dreams. Now I wash the gum from your eyes. You must habit yourself to the dazzle of the light in every moment of your life. Long have you timidly waited, holding a plank by the shore. We think about Odysseus in his different times of being washed up on a shore. Now I will you, I dare you, to be a bold swimmer. Whitman has to be thinking about Odysseus in the Odyssey 5 and several other times when Odysseus has to survive by swimming. To jump off in the midst of the sea, rise again, nod to me, shout, and laughingly dash with your hair. In other words, enjoy the journey, Whitman says. The journey that is your life. You've been on it all your life. You just maybe didn't realize it. I am the teacher of athletes, swimmers. He that by me spreads a wider breast than my own.